For 10,000 years, humanity has been told the same comforting story. That it stands on the brink of annihilation, surrounded by monsters, heretics, and gods that hunger for its extinction, and that only the Imperium holds the line. That only brutal laws, endless war, and unquestioning faith keep the species alive for one more day. This story is repeated in sermons, etched into data slates, whispered by parents to children as justification for suffering. It is the story that makes starvation acceptable, ignorance holy, and death meaningful. But what if this story is not the truth? What if it is only the first crime, carefully constructed, endlessly maintained, and enforced with absolute violence? The Imperium does not simply rule humanity. It defines reality for it. From the lowest hive slum to the highest spire of Terra, truth is not discovered, it is issued. Citizens are born into a universe already explained to them, a universe where questions are dangerous and answers are pre-approved. They are told what the Emperor is, what the enemy is, and what their place in the grand design must be. Anything outside that narrow frame is labeled heresy, madness, or corruption. Not because it is false, but because it is destabilizing. Because the Imperium understands something it will never admit aloud. The truth is more dangerous to human survival than ignorance. Most humans will never know why their world exists, or why it might be destroyed tomorrow without warning. They will never know the true scale of the war, the ancient failures that shaped it, or the compromises that damned it. Entire planets live and die believing they are the center of the Imperium's concern, when in reality they are numbers in a ledger, resources to be spent or erased. This is not an accident. It is policy. Knowledge creates perspective, and perspective creates doubt. Doubt leads to fear. Fear leads to chaos. And chaos does not need armies, it needs understanding. So the Imperium buries the past. Technologies are sealed away. Histories rewritten, victories exaggerated, defeats erased. Science becomes ritual. Curiosity becomes sin. Those who remember too much, who ask the wrong questions, who look too closely at how things truly function are silenced, not always with execution but with disappearance. A scholar reassigned, a data archive corrupted, a population relocated. The Imperium is meticulous in this way. It does not merely kill bodies. It amputates ideas. The cruel irony is that this crime is committed in the name of protection. The Imperium believes, perhaps correctly, that the average human mind cannot bear the truth of the galaxy. That if the full horror were revealed, worlds would fall into despair, rebellion, or worship of darker powers that promise meaning. So humanity is treated like a child locked in a burning house, told that the flames outside its room are imaginary, because panic would only hasten the end. The Imperium decides what humanity is allowed to know, not because it is benevolent, but because it is afraid. This is the foundation upon which all other crimes are built. Before the purges, before the sacrifices, before the mass graves and burning worlds, there is this lie, that humanity is being protected by strength and faith alone. In truth, it is being preserved through ignorance, shaped into something simpler, quieter, more obedient. A species kept alive by never being allowed to fully understand why it must suffer. And once this lie is accepted, once ignorance becomes virtue, then every other atrocity becomes not just possible, but necessary. Because when a civilization decides that the truth itself is too dangerous to survive, there is no crime it cannot justify in the dark. Imagine being born into a civilization that has already decided how much truth your mind is allowed to carry. From your very first breath, the Imperium has measured you, not as a person, but as a risk. A risk of knowing too much. A risk of asking why the stars burn, why wars never end, why entire worlds vanish from records overnight. So before you can even form the questions, the answers are taken from you. This is not neglect. This is design. The Imperium understands something fundamental about survival in the galaxy. Knowledge does not merely enlighten, it destabilizes. To know the full scale of the Imperium's failures, the ancient betrayals, the forgotten technologies, and the true nature of the enemies lurking beyond reality itself would fracture the human psyche. Hope would rot into despair. Faith would collapse into nihilism. And in that vacuum, chaos would rush in. So the Imperium makes a choice, one it renews every single day, to blind its own species for what it believes is the greater good. History is rewritten constantly. Entire eras vanish from public memory. Records contradict themselves on purpose, so no clear narrative can ever form. What cannot be controlled is destroyed. Libraries are burned not because they contain lies, but because they contain too much truth. Scientists are replaced by priests, engineers by ritualists, discovery by repetition. Humanity is not allowed to progress, only to maintain. To question how something works is dangerous. To ask why it must exist at all is fatal. And when ignorance alone is not enough, the Imperium escalates. Scholars disappear in the night. Administrators are accused of heresy for uncovering inconvenient data. Entire research facilities are erased from orbit because one calculation strayed too close to forbidden understanding. Most citizens never notice. They are told it was an accident, a rebellion, a necessary sacrifice, and because they do not know the wider context, they accept it. They always accept it. This is how the Imperium keeps control without chains. A population that does not know its own history cannot imagine a different future. A population that does not understand the enemy cannot question the war. A population taught that ignorance is purity will police itself. People begin to fear knowledge more than death, because they have been taught that understanding leads only to corruption. The greatest victory of the Imperium is not obedience, it is convincing humanity that blindness is safety. If you stay until the very end of this story, you will understand why this single crime, this deliberate suppression of truth, makes every other atrocity not just inevitable, but unstoppable. Because once a civilization decides that knowing is more dangerous than dying, it has already surrendered its soul. And this is only the beginning. Once the Imperium decides that humanity must be kept blind, it does not stop at hiding information. It restructures civilization itself around the absence of understanding. Entire worlds are engineered to function without ever knowing why they exist. Hive cities rise kilometer upon kilometer into poisoned skies, their populations laboring from birth to death without comprehension of what they produce or who ultimately benefits. To the Imperium, this is not cruelty. It is efficiency. A mind that understands too little to question will always work harder than one that understands too much. On most imperial worlds, people do not know what year it is. They do not know the name of the sector they belong to, or the wars fought in their name. They do not know that their planet may already be marked for destruction due to some distant calculation made centuries ago. They live inside a carefully sealed bubble of local myths, approved histories, and state-sanctioned prayers. Anything beyond that bubble is declared irrelevant or dangerous. The galaxy is reduced to a simple story: the Emperor protects, the enemy hates, obedience saves. The Imperium enforces this ignorance with terrifying precision. It understands that raw brutality alone is inefficient. Instead, it builds systems where suppression is invisible. Education teaches memorization, not comprehension. Religion replaces explanation with reverence. Bureaucracy fragments responsibility so completely that no single human ever understands the full machine they serve. Even planetary governors often rule in ignorance, carrying out orders whose purposes they will never know. This way, guilt has nowhere to settle. Everyone is complicit, but no one feels responsible. When someone does begin to see beyond the illusion, the response is swift and final. Not public, not dramatic, simply erased. A worker who notices patterns in shipment schedules. A clerk who realizes population numbers do not add up. A priest who finds contradictions in sacred texts. They are reassigned, silenced, or vanished. Their neighbors are told nothing, or worse, are told that the person was corrupted. The lesson spreads without a word ever being spoken. Curiosity is lethal. This crime compounds over generations. A population raised in ignorance produces children incapable of imagining alternatives. They inherit fear instead of knowledge, obedience instead of hope. Over time, humanity forgets that it ever had a choice. The Imperium does not need to crush rebellion on most worlds, because rebellion requires an understanding that things could be different. And that understanding has been systematically removed. The most chilling part is that the Imperium may be right. The galaxy is a place where truth can break minds, where knowledge can summon horrors, where awareness itself can damn entire worlds. The Imperium knows this. It has seen civilizations collapse under the weight of understanding. And so it commits its crime again and again, telling itself the same lie, that humanity is safer this way. But safety bought with blindness comes at a cost no one is allowed to calculate. Because while ignorance may shield humanity from some horrors, it also ensures that when disaster comes, people will never understand why it happened, or how it might have been prevented. The Imperium has traded resilience for control, adaptability for obedience. And in doing so, it has locked humanity into a future where survival depends not on wisdom, but on never learning from its own mistakes. And this is where ignorance stops being a shield, and becomes a slow, deliberate form of execution. Once ignorance is secured, the Imperium moves to its next, far more visible crime, sacrifice on a scale so vast that individual death becomes meaningless. In the Imperium of Man, human life is not sacred. It is abundant, and anything abundant is expendable. From the highest stratagem to the lowest trench, humanity is treated as fuel for a war that cannot be won, only delayed. This is not cruelty born of hatred. It is arithmetic. The Imperium wages war the way a collapsing star burns its mass, recklessly, endlessly, without concern for what remains afterward. Entire regiments are raised knowing they will never return. Soldiers are given weapons older than their bloodlines, armor that barely functions, and orders that guarantee annihilation. They are not expected to survive. They are expected to slow the enemy. To buy time measured not in years, but in minutes. And when they die, replacements are already en route, drawn from worlds that barely notice their populations thinning. Beyond the battlefield, the scale of sacrifice becomes even more grotesque. Planets are condemned not because they are lost, but because saving them would cost too much. A world might still be fighting, its people still praying, its defenders still bleeding in the Emperor's name, when the order arrives for extermination. Not as punishment, not as mercy, but as efficiency. Virus bombs, cyclonic torpedoes, fire from orbit, tools designed to erase billions in hours, all justified by a single phrase, acceptable losses. What makes this crime truly unforgivable is that it is not hidden. The Imperium does not deny that it sacrifices its own people. It glorifies it. Death is reframed as duty. Oblivion is honor. The individual is taught that their life has value only insofar as it can be spent. Mothers raise children knowing they will be handed a rifle. Worlds celebrate tithes of manpower the way ancient cultures once celebrated harvests. Humanity has been conditioned to cheer as it is fed into the grinder. And yet, even this brutality has a darker layer. The Imperium does not sacrifice lives only to fight enemies, it sacrifices them to maintain itself. Bureaucratic errors lead to famines that kill billions, because correcting them would disrupt the system. Supply lines are left to rot entire sectors rather than be rerouted. Refugees are abandoned in space because saving them would slow a fleet. In the Imperium, inefficiency is heresy, but waste is doctrine. The tragedy is that this system works, after a fashion. The Imperium still stands. Humanity still exists. Every sacrificed world buys time for another to live a little longer. Every billion dead delays extinction by another fraction of a second. And so the machine continues, grinding forward, fueled by corpses and justified by survival. The Imperium does not ask whether this is evil. It asks only whether it is necessary. But necessity has a way of eroding all limits. When death becomes currency, it is only a matter of time before the price rises. And in the Imperium of Man, it always does. As the Imperium perfects the art of sacrifice, it begins to reshape humanity's relationship with death itself. No longer is dying something to be feared or mourned. It is normalized, ritualized, and eventually industrialized. Entire populations are raised with the understanding that their purpose is not to live well, but to die usefully. This is not a byproduct of endless war, it is a deliberate cultural transformation. On countless worlds, children are taught prayers before they are taught words. Those prayers do not ask for peace or understanding. They ask for strength to endure, and for the privilege of being chosen. Chosen for labor, chosen for war, chosen for sacrifice. From a young age, humans are conditioned to see their own lives as temporary tools, existing solely to serve something vast and unknowable. Individual dreams are not crushed, they are never allowed to form. The Imperium reinforces this mindset through constant scarcity. Hunger, overcrowding, and disease are not always failures of governance. Often, they are tolerated, even encouraged. A population struggling to survive does not rebel. A starving worker does not ask philosophical questions. Misery keeps people focused, compliant, and grateful for whatever scraps of order the Imperium provides. When relief does come, it is framed as divine mercy, not basic responsibility. This is how the Imperium ensures an endless supply of bodies. Not just for armies, but for every system that requires human expenditure. Penal legions march into unwinnable battles. Labor crews are worked to death maintaining ancient machines they do not understand. Entire generations are consumed simply keeping the Imperium's decaying infrastructure from collapsing. Human life becomes interchangeable, replaceable, forgettable. And yet, the most disturbing aspect of this system is not the suffering, it is the acceptance. Humanity has been taught that this is normal, that this is how things have always been, that to wish for something better is naive, dangerous, or heretical. People do not dream of change because they have been convinced that survival itself is a miracle. And miracles demand sacrifice. The Imperium does not need to force this belief anymore. It has been embedded so deeply into culture, religion, and identity that humanity enforces it upon itself. Those who complain are shamed. Those who resist are condemned. Those who accept are praised. Over time, the distinction between victim and participant dissolves. Humanity becomes both the fuel and the caretaker of the machine that devours it. This is the true horror of the Imperium's crime of sacrifice. Not that it kills billions, but that it teaches those billions to believe their deaths are not only necessary, but righteous. And once a species accepts that premise, there is no limit to what can be taken from it. In a galaxy where reality itself can betray you, belief is not just comfort, it is power. The Imperium understands this better than any priest ever could. That is why faith is no longer something humanity is allowed to choose. It is something imposed, shaped, and sharpened into a tool of control. The crime is not that the Imperium encourages worship. The crime is that it weaponizes it. The Emperor of mankind was not meant to be a god. This truth, buried beneath 10,000 years of doctrine, is one of the Imperium's most dangerous secrets. He was a ruler, a visionary, a tyrant, a savior, depending on who you ask, but never a divine being. And yet, after his fall, the Imperium made a decision that could never be undone. It turned a man into an object of absolute worship, not because it was true, but because it was useful. A god cannot be questioned. A god does not need to explain himself. A god sanctifies suffering simply by existing. Faith becomes the glue that holds a collapsing civilization together. When resources fail, faith explains why. When worlds burn, faith justifies it. When children die screaming in manufactorums or soldiers vanish into meat grinders, faith transforms tragedy into purpose. The ecclesiarchy teaches that pain is proof of devotion, that endurance is holiness, that obedience is salvation. In doing so, it absolves the Imperium of responsibility. If suffering is sacred, then the system that causes it cannot be evil. Doubt, therefore, becomes the greatest sin of all. Not because doubt is false, but because it is contagious. One unanswered question can unravel a lifetime of belief. So the Imperium does not debate heresy. It eradicates it. Entire populations are burned for worshipping the wrong version of the Emperor, for interpreting scripture incorrectly, for hesitating when belief is demanded. Faith is enforced at gunpoint, and mercy is reserved only for the compliant. What makes this crime especially insidious is how it masquerades as hope. For many, faith is the only thing that makes their lives bearable. The Imperium knows this. It exploits it. It allows people just enough hope to keep going, but never enough to change anything. Miracles are staged. Relics are manufactured. Visions are curated. Anything that keeps the masses believing that their suffering has meaning is permitted, even encouraged. Over time, faith replaces truth entirely. People no longer ask whether something works, only whether it is holy. Machines function because they are prayed to, not because they are understood. Orders are followed because they are sacred, not because they are logical. The Imperium becomes immune to reform, because reform implies that something was wrong, and faith cannot tolerate that idea. In the end, belief becomes a cage more effective than any prison. Humanity chains itself willingly, singing hymns as it tightens the lock, and the Imperium watches, knowing that as long as faith remains absolute, it will never have to explain the crimes it commits in the Emperor's name. Once faith has hardened into doctrine, the Imperium turns its fear inward. It no longer looks only to the stars for enemies. It begins to see threats within the human form itself. Mutation, deviation, difference, anything that does not fit the Imperium's narrow definition of purity becomes a potential apocalypse. And so the crime of purity is born, a policy of extermination justified not by what something has done, but by what it might become. The galaxy is hostile to humanity in ways no doctrine can fully explain. Radiation, warp exposure, genetic drift, change is inevitable. But the Imperium does not see adaptation as survival. It sees it as contamination. Mutants are not treated as victims of circumstance, but as omens of doom. Abumans, even those who serve loyally, are tolerated only temporarily. What remains is a species cannibalizing its own future. Every purge reduces humanity's potential. Every execution narrows the path forward. The Imperium survives by cutting away parts of itself, convinced that if it removes enough, what remains will be pure. But there is a point where cutting becomes fatal. And the Imperium has long since passed it. This is the crime of purity, not just genocide, but self-inflicted stagnation. A civilization so terrified of what humanity might become that it ensures it will never become anything at all. The Imperium's crimes of ignorance, sacrifice, faith, and purity all converge at one unholy center, the Golden Throne. This is not merely a seat of power. It is a machine of unimaginable horror, designed to keep the Emperor alive while feeding the lifeblood of humanity into its gears. Every day, thousands of psykers, children, adults, volunteers, and prisoners alike, were harvested to fuel the psychic engines that prevent the Emperor from death. Their screams, their lives, their very essences, are drained to sustain a God who cannot move, cannot speak, and cannot intervene. Yet humanity is told that this is salvation. The Golden Throne is both a lifeboat and a prison. The Imperium cannot afford to lose it, because if the Emperor dies completely, the warp storms that threaten every world would explode unchecked. Humanity's survival depends on the continuous ritualized slaughter of innocents. Every world contributes, every sacrifice counts. No one sees the total, but the cost is astronomical. Billions are consumed over centuries, and still the machine hums on. Humanity survives not through heroism, not through ingenuity, but through ritualized consumption. And the crime is not only in the deaths themselves. It is in the justification. The Imperium tells its citizens that these sacrifices are noble, holy, necessary. Priests chant prayers as psykers are drawn into the machine. Families are told their children are being given the highest honor. The population accepts it because the alternative, unimaginable destruction, is always presented as far worse. Humanity has been trained to see itself as expendable, even as it keeps the entire galaxy alive. But the horror does not stop there. The Golden Throne is failing. Its mechanisms are ancient, patched, and fragile. The psykers themselves grow weaker, the rituals more desperate. Entire navies patrol the void not just against enemies, but to protect this fragile system from disruption. And yet, for all this effort, the Emperor cannot act. He cannot command. He cannot intervene. He exists in a perpetual state between life and death, preserved by the endless suffering of millions, and the Imperium pretends that this is divine providence. This is the ultimate lesson of the Imperium: survival requires horror. Continuation requires atrocity. Every crime committed, every world burned, every child sacrificed is a single cog in the machine that sustains existence itself. Humanity is alive not because it is strong, not because it is righteous, but because it has become fuel. The line between protection and atrocity has vanished entirely. The Imperium is not preserving humanity, it is consuming it to preserve a dream of survival. And yet, the Imperium persists. Every day, the Golden Throne hums. Every day, psykers scream. Every day, humanity lives, unaware of the cost, complicit in its own continuation. This is not survival. This is a civilization mortgaged to death. Everything the Imperium does, from keeping its citizens ignorant, to sacrificing billions, to weaponizing faith, to purging mutation, to sustaining the Emperor in perpetual torment, is not a mistake. It is deliberate, and it is unavoidable. The Imperium knows the truth. If it ceases these atrocities, humanity will not survive. Every law, every ritual, every slaughter is a calculated decision to buy time. And yet, with each act, the moral debt grows, the horror compounds, and the price of continuation rises exponentially. The Imperium exists in a constant state of moral and existential compromise. Each generation inherits the sins of the last, and each must add its own. There is no moment of respite. There is no future where the machine can pause and breathe. Every world, every soul, every child is a resource to be exploited. Every atrocity is justified by necessity. And necessity, in this universe, is absolute. To act otherwise is to invite annihilation. This is why the Imperium is a civilization without hope. It survives, yes, but it survives by perpetuating its own crimes indefinitely. There is no redemption. There is no mercy. There is only survival at any cost. Its leaders know that even questioning the methods could doom humanity, yet in knowing this, they condemn themselves to endless complicity. They are not tyrants in the ordinary sense. They are prisoners of circumstance, architects of atrocity, and witnesses to horrors that have no end. Humanity itself becomes a tool of its own oppression. Citizens live, fight, and die believing that their suffering is necessary, noble, even holy. They police themselves. They accept sacrifices that would shock any other species. They pray to a God who cannot act, even as the machinery of horror grinds on. Survival has been turned into a form of execution, and humanity has been conditioned to celebrate it. And at the heart of it all lies a question that no one in the Imperium dares to answer aloud. If the only way to survive is to commit infinite crimes, is survival itself worth it? Every action, every atrocity, every death is a piece of an unending ledger, and no one alive has the right to close the account. The Imperium cannot stop. It will never stop. Its crimes are eternal because its survival depends on them. And humanity, for all its endurance, has become complicit in the most horrifying bargain ever struck: life at the cost of its own soul. This is the final, inescapable question. Every atrocity, the ignorance, the sacrifices, the enforced faith, the purges, the ritualized deaths to sustain the Emperor, leads to this single, horrifying truth: the Imperium is both savior and executioner. Humanity is alive, yes, but at a cost so staggering that to call it survival is almost meaningless. The species continues not because it is strong, clever, or virtuous, but because it has learned to accept unthinkable crimes as necessities. Every generation inherits the guilt of the last, yet the cycle never ends. The machine grinds on, consuming innocence, hope, and potential with ruthless precision. The Imperium's existence is a paradox of morality and necessity. On one hand, it shields humanity from enemies too powerful, forces too ancient, and horrors too vast to comprehend. On the other, it ensures that every day of survival is paid for in suffering that dwarfs the threat it claims to defend against. This is no longer a question of good or evil, it is a question of inevitability. Every choice reinforces the next atrocity. Every act of preservation demands a new transgression. Humanity is caught in a perpetual loop, where the very act of living requires complicity in horrors that would be inconceivable under any other government, any other civilization, anywhere in the galaxy. The Imperium thrives on this moral compromise. It does not merely tolerate cruelty, it depends upon it. It does not merely demand obedience, it cultivates it, shaping every soul to accept that suffering is not just inevitable, but sacred. Humanity polices itself, worships its oppressors, and sacrifices its children without question. The line between tyrant and victim blurs. Survival becomes indistinguishable from atrocity. And in this grim reality, there is no redemption, only continuation. Yet even in this endless darkness, there is a quiet, terrible fascination. The Imperium's crimes reveal something profound about humanity, its resilience, its ability to endure horror beyond comprehension, and its willingness to accept a monstrous survival as the only reality. But this endurance comes at a price. The very qualities that make humans survive, obedience, faith, fear, are the same qualities that perpetuate their suffering. The Imperium has taught them to live, but it has ensured that life itself is a burden beyond measure. And so, as the galaxy turns and wars rage across countless stars, humanity continues, blind, obedient, fearful, and complicit. The Imperium remains unchallenged not because it is righteous, but because it is necessary. The crimes it commits are infinite, unending, and absolute. They are the dark calculus of survival, and humanity pays the cost with every breath. In the end, the question lingers, heavy and unavoidable: if survival demands monstrosity, then what is humanity worth? This is the ultimate horror of the Imperium. Life persists, but humanity itself may have already been lost. The Imperium has long since transformed survival into a ritual of horror. It does not merely govern humanity, it harvests it. Every child born, every mind trained, every soul guided into obedience, exists as part of an endless cycle designed to keep a collapsing empire from falling entirely into the void. There is no pause, no mercy, no hope for reform. The crimes are committed not out of cruelty alone, but out of necessity, and the scale of them is incomprehensible. To survive, humanity must endure horrors that would break other species before they even begin. Entire worlds are carefully measured against the calculus of utility. Planets that could thrive under different leadership are sacrificed, their populations funneled into endless wars, their cities consumed, their histories erased. Families accept these losses as sacred duty. Soldiers die in meaningless campaigns, praised for their obedience even as their deaths are catalogued as nothing more than statistics. Laborers toil endlessly, sustaining weapons, ships, and machines that will one day consume them. Humanity has been trained to participate in its own destruction, and it does so willingly, because to resist would mean immediate annihilation. Faith, ritual, and ceremony wrap this cycle in purpose. Citizens chant prayers while factories burn, sing hymns while convoys vanish into warp storms, and call executions divine justice. Each act of suffering is framed as a gift, each atrocity a sacrifice for the greater good. The Imperium does not need to coerce compliance, it cultivates gratitude for oppression. Hope is manufactured, contained, and rationed, but it is always tied to obedience. The very act of living becomes inseparable from the crimes that ensure continuation. The scale of this system is staggering. Consider the psykers drawn into the Golden Throne, their life energy feeding the Emperor in an eternal struggle between life and death. Consider the billions perished to maintain stagnant worlds, the generations erased to prevent mutation or deviation. Consider the untold numbers who die believing they are fulfilling sacred duty, unaware that their sacrifice is only a cog in a machine that will never forgive, never rest, and never stop. This is not merely cruelty. It is totalizing control, an orchestration of existence itself. And yet, this is the Imperium's triumph. Humanity endures. Civilization continues. Wars rage, stars burn, and life persists, precisely because it has surrendered every right to question, every opportunity to hope, and every claim to dignity. Survival is maintained at the expense of morality, at the expense of identity, at the expense of humanity itself. The Imperium does not create monsters, it relies upon them, cultivates them, and ensures that the line between victim and perpetrator disappears entirely. In the end, this is the Imperium's cruel genius. It has made humanity complicit in its own torment, and in doing so, guaranteed that life, in some form, will continue. Every crime, every atrocity, every sacrifice committed in the name of survival leads to a singular, undeniable reality: the Imperium knows it cannot stop. It cannot afford to halt its genocides, its purges, its ritualized killings, or its manipulation of faith, because stopping would mean extinction. Every act of horror is both a necessity and a moral collapse. The leaders of the Imperium understand this. They see the unending ledger of lives spent to maintain existence. They witness the consequences of inaction. Yet they continue, knowing that the very act of continuation demands crime. This is the ultimate crime, the knowledge that one is trapped in a cycle of atrocity with no hope of reprieve. Every calculation, every decree, every planetary sacrifice is weighed not against morality, but against survival. Human life, innocence, potential, all are tools, and none are sacred. The Imperium does not delude itself. It knows the truth of its own monstrosity, yet it persists, because the alternative is annihilation. This awareness does not absolve them. It only deepens the weight of culpability. And humanity, for all its endurance, participates willingly. Citizens obey, pray, and sacrifice because they have been trained to believe that their suffering is necessary, righteous, even holy. They do not question, because questioning threatens everything. They do not resist, because resistance ensures immediate death. They cannot see the full picture, yet they uphold it. Complicity becomes instinct, obedience becomes identity, and ignorance becomes virtue. The Imperium has mastered not only the art of survival, but the art of shaping a population into willing participants in its own torment. This eternal cycle leaves no room for hope, no space for redemption. Every generation inherits the crimes of the last, and every generation is forced to add its own. There is no relief, no pause, no moment in which humanity can catch its breath and wonder if there might be another way. The galaxy is unforgiving, the warp is relentless, and the Imperium's machinery is too fragile to stop. Survival itself demands atrocity, and morality is the first casualty. And in this unending calculus, a chilling question emerges: if humanity can only survive through infinite crimes, is its survival truly a victory, or merely a prolongation of inevitable decay? Every act that keeps the Imperium alive also ensures that the cycle of horror will continue. Every death, every prayer, every enforced silence feeds a system that can never be free of guilt. And that, perhaps, is the darkest crime of all: the certainty that there is no end, and no redemption. This is the final, inescapable truth that the Imperium forces upon every living soul. Humanity exists not because it is righteous, clever, or noble, but because it has mastered the art of atrocity. Every atrocity committed, the ignorance imposed, the billions sacrificed, the faith weaponized, the purges of mutation, the endless ritualized feeding of the Emperor, serves a single purpose: continuation at any cost. Humanity survives, yes, but it survives as a species that has surrendered its morality, its autonomy, and its innocence. It is alive, but it is not free. And that is the ultimate horror. The Imperium has become both savior and executioner. It shields the human race from annihilation, yet it achieves this shield only through crimes that would shame any other civilization. Every life taken, every world erased, every mind controlled, is justified in the name of protection. And yet, this protection is not benevolent. It is conditional, transactional, and endless. Humanity is kept alive not out of love or duty, but because it is necessary for the Imperium's survival. Its continued existence is the byproduct of calculated horror, a grim ledger of lives consumed to fuel the machine of survival. Even those who serve willingly, who raise children to die for the Emperor, who chant prayers and celebrate obedience, are complicit in this system. Humanity polices itself, worships its oppressors, and sanctifies suffering. The line between victim and perpetrator is blurred until it disappears entirely. Humanity lives, but it does so as part of a machine designed to extract obedience, loyalty, and blood. Life continues, yet every day is purchased with atrocity. And the ultimate question lingers, heavy and unavoidable: if humanity can survive only by becoming a monster, then has it truly survived at all? Every generation inherits the sins of the last, every world pays the cost of the last, and the cycle repeats without end. Survival in the Imperium is not triumph, it is the quiet horror of continuation. It is life stripped of hope, meaning, and choice, sustained by a civilization that has long since forsaken the very ideals it claims to protect. In the end, the Imperium endures. Humanity endures. But in enduring, it has lost something far greater than any battle, any world, or any life: it has lost itself. And that is the price of survival in a galaxy where the only way to live is to commit crimes that cannot be forgiven. The Imperium of Man exists in a paradox that no one can escape. It preserves humanity, yet it corrupts it. It protects life, yet it extinguishes it by the billions. Every world, every soul, every decision is measured not against morality, not against justice, but against the unrelenting demand to survive. To question this system is to invite annihilation. To resist it is to guarantee death. Humanity's freedom has been exchanged for endurance, and the price is incomprehensible. Every citizen, knowingly or unknowingly, participates in this ongoing crime. Workers build the engines that consume psykers. Soldiers march into battles they will not survive. Families praise rituals that ensure the deaths of their own children. Obedience becomes instinct, belief becomes a weapon, and ignorance becomes sanctity. Humanity has learned not only to endure horror, but to embrace it as a necessity. The Imperium does not merely rule, it shapes existence itself, teaching each generation that atrocity is the only path to life. And yet, the Imperium's crimes are not random. They are methodical, deliberate, and inescapable. Ignorance is enforced because knowledge threatens survival. Sacrifice is demanded because death preserves continuity. Faith is weaponized because hope without obedience is dangerous. Purity is enforced because deviation invites annihilation. And the Emperor endures because the lives of millions fuel his continued existence. Every act is part of a vast equation where morality is a variable too costly to include. This is the ultimate horror of the Imperium, a civilization aware of its crimes, complicit in its horrors, yet utterly unable to stop. Humanity survives, but it survives as a machine of its own oppression. Life continues, but every breath is purchased with guilt, obedience, and suffering. The ledger of atrocity grows with each passing day, and no end is in sight. The Imperium's survival is assured, but at a cost so profound that the very meaning of humanity is called into question. In the end, the Imperium has created a civilization that can live only by committing crimes it cannot halt, cannot justify, and cannot escape. Humanity endures, but it endures as something unrecognizable, preserved, yes, but corrupted beyond repair. Survival has become the crime, and the crime has become humanity itself. The answer is both simple and devastating. It survives, but it survives as a shadow of what it once was. The Imperium has ensured that humanity endures in body, but not in spirit. Minds are trained to obey, hearts are trained to fear, and souls are trained to accept that suffering is not only inevitable, but sacred. Individuality, curiosity, hope, and freedom have been methodically stripped away, replaced by a single, unyielding truth: survival demands monstrosity. And in accepting this, humanity has become both victim and executioner, protector and prisoner, worshipper and oppressor. The galaxy continues its endless, burning dance of war.